Welcome, everyone, to our Field Talk, our chat with Dr. Ryan Mullins. I thank you so much for being a featured guest on my YouTube channel. How are you doing tonight?
Doing all right.
Great. So could you tell us a little bit about yourself, just a quick intro, and then we'll get right into the issues.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so I've got a PhD in theology and then a doctoral habilitation in dogmatics. Most of my work is on philosophy of time, philosophy of emotion, and then a lot of issues in philosophical theology.
Awesome. So some of the issues we're going to go over, that I got listed here, are, it's not exclusive to the stuff that you published, but we do want to emphasize that a lot of what you published, it has to do with like classical theism, like stuff like divine simplicity, the timelessness of God, and stuff like that. So we won't be looking. I mean, of course, it's all kind of related and here and there, but like we're going to be looking at some topics that you typically we are not as emphasized in a lot of your interviews and a lot of your chats. So
Yeah.
I'm looking forward to the discussion. All right. So, Graham Oppy, there's like several clips of him, I think in his book as well, talks about the rationality of theism and atheism, and doesn't explicitly say that any of them are particularly irrational, that you could be rational and you could hold either. I want to get your thoughts on that, but there's like, obviously there are going to be some views that are going to be sort of, for lack of a better phrase, intrinsically irrational. I don't have an example off the top of my head, but some people might think that divine simplicity is incoherent in itself, and so if you're an adherer of divine simplicity, then there's got to be something, you're failing maybe with respect to some kind of set of epistemic rational norms. But I don't know if you see philosophical views that way. Can you comment on Oppy's take and what I said?
Yeah, so I don't exactly know where Graham is going with his research agenda, because I've read a lot of his stuff in the past, and he's trying to push this sort of view where the rationality, if I understand correctly, the rationality of a worldview can only be judged from within a worldview, or at least the plausibility of certain ideas can only be judged from within a worldview. And I find that to be a really interesting hypothesis, but I had this initial reaction, just saying like, no, this can't be right.
Mm-hmm.
And here's why. I don't think your average person has a well-developed worldview like Graham does. And I don't think your average philosopher has a well-developed worldview like he does. I mean, Oppy's done a lot of work to try to have this sort of systematic view of the world, and that's really, really hard to do. And if that's what I need to have in order to start judging the plausibility of different ideas, then no one's going to be able to judge the plausibility of ideas, because most people, their worldview is half-baked, it's incoherent, they've not really thought it out, it's going to have a lot of holes in it.
Mm-hmm.
So I just don't think this is right. So as I see it, I guess you'd have to change the not necessarily the framework, or maybe lower the bar, but the way you've got a set of intuitions you just find yourselves with, and you have a set of beliefs you just find yourself with. And then you start reflecting on them and start seeing, do they fit together with each other? Are they coherent? Do they fit with other things I know to be true? Do they fit with some different evidence I see? So I find the whole task of epistemology to be kind of a complete mess, really, because it's just, I mean, this is just how, when we develop, by the time you start questioning things, you already find yourself with a lot of beliefs. So judging the plausibility of something it's not coming from a worldview. It's coming with just the beliefs you find yourselves with and the intuitions you find yourself with.
Mm-hmm. So let me use an analogy here, because I think
Mhm.
this is where I'm not going to pretend like I know where Oppie's coming from here, but here's my guess. Take two views like flat Earth and round Earth.
Mhm.
So it's my position that that like people thousands of years ago weren't irrational, perhaps with the belief in flat Earth. In fact, I bet there could be cases in which someone can rationally hold to flat Earth today, right? Like you could just imagine that they're justified in accepting a particular authority, and so the authority tells you, like, oh, the Earth is flat. I mean, like if your parents taught you the Earth is flat, like they everything else that they've said, kind of meets the kind of practical consequences of whatever said view that they're holding to, and so maybe you might think it's reasonable to think, or probable to think, that the Earth is flat if your parents are telling you the Earth is flat. There are examples of, like, let's say a teacher, instead of writing H2O, writes H3O on the board, and
Mhm.
then form the belief that water is H3O. I don't think that's irrational. In fact, given that kind of context, you're rational for at least momentarily believing that water is H3O. And so they're going to be, I guess, in a lot of these views that, I guess there are views that are a posteriorly known, that it seems like for any a posteriori belief, like you could be rational, and depending on the kind of probability spectrum or space in the background. But then there are views like, I guess a priori views that seem to less speak to that, right? So
Mhm.
do you see, first of all, what do you think about the flat Earth versus globe Earth analogy, and whether that carries over to theism and atheism?
The flat Earth case, I don't think is a good one, because when we look at least Western history, we've known for a very, very long time that the Earth is a globe. I mean, so yeah, it goes back to ancient times, and then you even see it in late antiquity, like in Saint Augustine's City of God. He talks about the Earth being a globe. So this was pretty. So we've known for a long time. But the H3O example I really like, because this has definitely happened to all of us. Like you hear something from a teacher, or who knows who, and they might have just misspoken, and then you never heard any countervailing evidence or anything to the contrary. Like you had no defeater for it until you find yourself in a very embarrassing situation at a party, and someone brings it up, and you're just like, oh yeah, there's no such thing as narwhals. And they're like, narwhals exist. You know that, right? It's not just made up. And they're like, what? I remember one of my friends in college that happened to him.
Mhm.
And this is the case where, yeah, you can see how they were believing something on the basis of testimony, and then when they were presented with a defeater, they're like, oh gosh, now I need to check and see what's really the case. So in that case, these sort of examples, I guess what you have is just a very standard way about how we go about reasoning. We hear certain things, we come to develop our beliefs in certain ways, and when we're presented with defeaters, then we got to start testing and see, hang on, is this right? And the way you handle that, I think, is partly where the rationality is going to come into play. So something like that you could carry over to theism and atheism. So you grow up in an atheistic household, you grow up in a theistic household, whatever, you're just told this is the way things are. And then at some point you reach an age where you can start thinking about stuff and start questioning it, and you're presented with some defeaters. Do you do your due diligence to check the evidence and start weighing it? The average person probably isn't going to do that. But yeah, I think, that's where I would start saying, you've got the opportunity to start reasoning in a way that you didn't before. And are you going to do it well? Then I would start judging the rationality of somebody.
Okay, well, so I'm an atheist, and if you call me irrational, that's fine. I don't have I don't have a flimsy, I'm not very sensitive about stuff like that. But do you think that atheism is irrational then?
No, because I think, okay, well, there's definitely, I would say some atheists are irrational, but I would say the same thing about some theists, because the way they handle the evidence, the way they try to approach, like really checking to see, do I have good grounds or good reasons for thinking that my beliefs are true? Some people, they really suck at that, and then others, they're trying really hard. And that's one of the things that when I first started doing a lot of these YouTube interviews a few years ago, I was expecting most people to be in that camp of, you've done absolutely zero work to think about these things. And I've definitely met a lot of those people, but I've been impressed with the number of people that actually started reading stuff, like actual philosophy of religion, reading Swinburne, reading Oppie. And I'm like, how old are you? You know, you're 20 and you're reading. Okay, cool. I get that's a thing you could do when you're 20, or you could try to go on a date. I don't know. So I might question your rationality there. So you got your priorities a little bit off, but yeah, but I'm seeing people actually trying to sit down and try to read and think through things and talk about it and discuss it and debate it. And that's how I think you develop your beliefs rationally, is having to have this sort of dialogue back and forth with people.
Okay. So that brings us to, like, atheism is all about whether, our attitudes about the existence of God. So it's actually, it's a difficult endeavor to define God, because I do a lot of little debate stuff, and when I find myself, again, I'm getting this from Oppie. Oppie distinguishes between like a concept, the concept of God, and then conceptions of God, and that may be hard for me to explain right now. But I guess he uses this analogy of Atlantis. So people are wondering if Atlantis exists, and there's like a concept of Atlantis, and there's like deviation such that, like, okay, we're no longer talking about Atlantis. Like if someone say, I think Atlantis exists. Have you ever been to, is it Venice that's like underwater or whatever?
It will be eventually. Right now, it's still,
but it's a city
above.
in the water in a way. Right after Katrina, New Orleans is underwater. I'm like, there's Atlantis, right? Because Atlantis is just for an underwater city or whatever. And we'd be like, well, look, that's just not what we're talking about. That's not even a conception of Atlantis, because people might have different ideas of Atlantis, different conceptions of Atlantis, but they're supposed to track this like concept of Atlantis. And I think that he ties that to, kind of the referent fixing things, that like that Atlantis isn't a title. It's functions more like a name. And so when we're defining God, I meet people that define God as the universe. I meet people that define God as just a creator, period. I think Oppie's sort of definition is something like, well, first of all, he thinks there can only be one God because it functions more like a name than a title or some kind of predicate. Well, property, I should say. I think he defines it something like as a superhuman or super being that has power over nature or any other supernatural entity that has causal powers, right? I think that's his definition. I want to know what you think about that. Maybe you can offer your thoughts on the concept of God, or what you think about what I said.
So a lot of the work I've been doing is trying to clarify the concept of God and different conceptions or models of God. It's been a major part of my research over the last several years. So the idea of concepts are usually pretty thin. So like the case of like justice, like, well, people should get what they deserve. And you're like, okay, well, what does that mean? And then the way you answer that question, now you're developing some sort of conception, some sort of thicker notions. And the same thing is the case with God. So when you're looking at across the world's religions, I think there's a really clear concept that's underlying a lot of the different debates. So I take the concept of God to be that of a perfect being, which is the single ultimate foundation of reality. And so for example, Buddhists and Jainists, they're atheists in the Indian traditions, and they're going to say, yeah, that's right, because there's no thing that is the single ultimate foundation of reality. There might be some beings that are like omniscient and omnipotent, but there's no creators. There's nothing that's like the foundation of reality. And so I'm like, okay, so we've got some agreement here from across the world's religions on this, the concept at least.
Okay, so would you consider then? I'm certain you think. Well, would those that held to like a Greek, the Greek pantheon, would they be theist on your view?
So a lot of the lesser deities that you see, they still want to trace them back to some kind of ultimate like being. And so you'll see different in a lot of the different mythologies, you'll see like, maybe a Kronos or something like that. So it seems like they're gesturing towards that. And then when, was it Herodotus? Wait, not Herodotus. Homer, sorry. Oh my gosh, it's been a while since I studied my ancient Greek. So when Homer starts to try to do this, I guess you could call it like a demythologizing process, and then Aristotle and Plato coming along and continuing that, you're seeing them go, yeah, we're tracing back to this ultimate thing. Let's think about that more. What's that ultimate foundation of reality really look like? Because a lot of these lesser deities, we know we're telling ourselves really interesting stories that are really cool and interesting and give us lots of cultural value, but is it really like the best way to really theorize about the way the world is? So what I see with those sorts of people is capturing certain intuitions that you see in some of the ancient Greek myths, and trying to and then trying to really make some interesting inferences that I think take us back to the concept.
Okay. Are you a Marvel fan?
I've seen some of the Marvel movies, and then at some point I got a little bit tired because it was like there's too many of
Yeah, I'm
these.
sick and
I can't
tired of
keep
it.
up. Yeah.
I love the Iron Man movie.
Mhm.
And then after that, I know I like the, the whatever in game stuff. And then after
Yeah.
that, I got like kind of lost interest. But so based on the concept of God that you've offered, right? You would say that there's some kind of major equivocation when Loki calls himself a god.
Right. So what you've got in English, unfortunately, we're stuck with some of these terms. So what we do to distinguish is like capital G God and then lowercase, like because what you see in a lot of different religious traditions across the globe is this idea of they're these lesser deities that have some sort of great amount of power. They've got a great deal of influence in some particular domain, but are they the single ultimate foundation of reality? Are they absolutely perfect? No. And do they have a source, an origin? Usually, yeah, they've got some sort of origin story.
Hmm.
And so you're like, right, this isn't like the real concept of like capital G God. This
Okay.
is like lesser deities that have sort of superhuman power.
So let's say you're in that Marvel universe that they've created in Hollywood or whatever,
Mhm.
and you are succumbed by Loki's charisma and his power, and you worship him and you refer to him as God, and you're even fine with calling him little g God. Would that person be a theist on your view?
It depends if they think there's like a like a perfect being that's the ultimate foundation of reality.
But it's Loki. It's like Loki from the Marvel thing, right? They're
Oh, if they're
worship.
thinking that Loki is that?
Yeah, like
Um,
because there are Loki worshippers in that universe,
yeah.
and they would be fine to acknowledge that Loki is not like the foundation of reality or creator of all, but they still worship him and they still call him God. Would
Mhm.
they be a theist on your view? It doesn't seem like you would say they would be a theist.
I feel like they're just confused. Yeah.
Okay.
And I'm trying to ignore the fact that in the story, like he like brainwashes a bunch of people. I'm trying to set that aside
Huh.
because that was my first reaction. Was like, well, he brainwashes them. Like, but that's not the point. No, your point is, what if I started worshiping something like that, and then I
Mhm.
would then I think you should say, Ryan, you're just a bit confused right now. Like, like this thing began to exist. Like that. You want to say that's God? And I'm like, I didn't really think about it very well, did I? Did I? I feel like that's the way the conversation should go. If I
Okay.
were, yeah.
So if for anybody who's interested in, because I brought up Oppie,
Mhm.
he has a great book called Describing Gods and talks about the concept of God. So if anybody is wondering where I'm getting that stuff from, it's from Describing God's Oppie, and we'll plug in your stuff too. I
Sure.
just want to
Yeah.
cite where I'm getting that from. But okay, so let's move on to apologetics, the apologetic space. So would you divide apologetics with evidentialism and precept, or like is that as usually those are contrasted? Like how do you see apologetics in terms of the types that
It's a bit difficult for me to. I definitely don't want to put it in these two categories. Even though I know that's really popular online right now. When I was doing my master's about, oh gosh, it was over 10 years ago. Um, we did a whole semester just on apologetics, and we went through a lot of different methodologies. And then when we came to like presuppositionalism, my professor didn't even really finish his lecture. Instead, he went on this rant about, because he was a Calvinist, and so he was like, "Now, if people tell you can't be a good Calvinist because you're not a precept, because I guess because he was a hardcore evidentialist, and he's like, if people start bullying you, telling you you're not allowed to do that because you're a Calvinist, just tell them they're wrong. Tell them they need to pray." And I'm like, okay. So it was instead we got like some kind of grievance from my professor, and then that was all we got on precept. Whereas instead, what we looked at were other methodologies, where like some sort of evidentialism, and then another really common one that was very popular at the time is something in the neighborhood of presuppositionalism, but it's more of like worldview analysis, where what Francis Schaeffer, he would sometimes call it like blowing the roof off of someone. So what you're doing is you're looking at someone's worldview and saying, is it actually coherent? And then trying to see if there's internal inconsistencies in it. And then you point out an internal inconsistency, and then you go, well, my view is coherent. It is internally coherent. And I know that sometimes the precept sounds like that's what they're doing. And that's the most charitable interpretation I can give of what they're doing.
Well, okay, so which brings us to, what do you think of like the kind of the specific Van Tillian Bonson form of precept? What are your thoughts on that?
I can't understand what Van Til's up to, and I've not read him in a long time, so it's difficult for me to competently say what he's up to. But a lot of precepts that I see going back to when I was much younger as well into today, what I see them doing is going, my worldview just is coherent without question, and you can't know anything at all apart from Jesus Christ. And I'm like, I feel like when my mom was teaching first grade and second grade, like she taught them 2 + 2 = 4, and they knew that, and then their beliefs about Jesus didn't really fit into the picture. Whether or not they had like thought Jesus was, who knows what they thought about Jesus because they're little kids. I feel like that's just completely like a separate issue. Like I don't see how these things connect. What I see from a lot of popular presuppositionalists is this attitude of, you give me some sort of claim, it doesn't matter what, and then I go, by what standard? How do you know that? And somehow me just asking that question is a methodology, and I don't see that as a methodology. I just see this as a sometimes interesting question, and then sometimes a question that seems out of place right now. Like, how do I know 2 + 2 = 4? I just do. Like, how do I know that the Earth is round? Well, because some evidence. Like, it depends on the thing, and the answer is not going to be because Jesus Christ is Lord or something. Like, I feel like that's a weird leap to get there.
Yeah, so there's like the argument, and we can like be, there's like the tag format, or a transcendental argument, whatever that is in the first place, and then how they might defend the premises. There's that, and we can be critical of that, which I am. I don't think any of it works. But then there's the strategy, which is, I'm on the other side of the aisle here. I'm like, since I'm an atheist and I talk to Christians often, it's this tactic where like, this notion of transcendental, which might amount to like logic, intelligibility, moral values, etc. The reliability of your sense perception, the whole list of stuff. And what I notice happens is that they ask you how you account for these things, epistemologically, how you account for these things. And the hope is that they give some stupid answer, or they're unable to, or they just say, I don't know how to ground those things. And then they take a W from that. And as like that has anything to do with justifying the premises that they laid out in the argument or any of defense of them.
Yeah.
Right. And it's just this horrible tactic, because the questions they ask are questions that I can barely answer. Right. Like they literally go through Bertrand Russell's 10 the problems of philosophy, and they ask each question and then expect you to have answers, when like not, even the most some of the greatest philosophers of all time are unsettled by some of those questions. So I think it's actually, I don't want to say it's like intrinsically disingenuous, but it should be. You should realize, if you're running this argument, like that particular strategy of interaction, I think that I think you need to be reformed. What do you think?
I think that's right, because when I was doing my PhD, I remember one of my office mates asking me, "What do you think of like Bonson and presuppositionalism?" And I was like, "That's still a thing." And this would have been like 2010, and so I was shocked that this still was a thing at that point. And so now here we are in 2024, and I'm still shocked that this is a thing. And so I was asking, like, get me up to speed. What's going on? And it was exactly the sort of stuff you're describing, where I just ask these big questions, and I'm like, yeah, those are all the questions I am deeply interested in answering. But do I have good answers to them? Of course not. Like I'm trying to figure it out. And so I don't see it as if I stump someone, because I'm like, how does like mathematics all hang together? And I'm like, that's a really difficult question. And if I don't have an answer, that's not an automatic win for theism, as far as I can tell. I feel like I've got a lot more legwork to do to get the win for theism on that.
The only appreciation I have for precepts really is kind of the same. Like, would a flat Earth? If you ever talk to someone that believes in flat Earth, most people are not really prepared to defend the globe Earth, right? Like, and so when a flat Earth is asking you questions, then you're like, oh my gosh, like maybe I should know more about why I think the Earth is round. So yeah, they're asking really heavy questions, like, and so it pushes me to like go and try to figure some of these problems out. But as far as an apologetic, I think it's absolutely the wrong way to go. And
Yeah.
I think it's usually terribly ineffective. But it seems like we agree on that, and that's good to hear. Which brings us to what do you think about young Earth creationism?
It was a view I held when I was a teenager, because my biology teacher at the Christian school I went to was very hell-bent, that's the right word for it, very hell-bent on young Earth creationism. And then I discovered later the Bible teachers were not hell-bent on this because they studied stuff. I don't know. I don't want to say anything mean, so I'll stop right there. Anyway, so as I went on into like my college education, I started learning about a lot of different options that Christians have and the different debates and the history of these debates, and started to realize, oh, young Earth creationism is not the only option. It really isn't. And there's really good arguments for thinking that we do not have to affirm that as we're reading scripture. And so that's the view I affirm now, is that young Earth creationism is false. The scientific evidence, I think, is quite good for a very, very old universe. Well, okay. I mean, relative to other things, I guess. I mean, 13 billion years, give or take a billion. That feels old to me, but it's definitely older than, 6,000, 8,000, 10,000 years. And there's a weird history to young Earth creationism being very popular in America, where it's not popular in other parts of the Christian world. And part of that has to do with some weird things that were happening in the 1960s and 1970s in America. So there's this whole like sociological history of what's going on there too, of why young Earth creationism is so popular and presented as if it's the only option in America, whereas most other places it was never really considered as the only option. It's not been that popular of a view throughout Christian history.
Okay, so not a fan is what I'm.
That's the short answer. Yeah.
I started as a young creationist. But again, just like with the precepts and the flat earthers, I have to give it to the younger creationists, because I don't think I would have discovered philosophy without them, because I don't want to say indoctrinated. Maybe I was. I don't really think so. I had a wonderful religious upbringing, to be fair, but my parents put me in this study called Demolishing Strongholds. Do you know what that is?
No, that sounds slightly familiar, but I don't know. I don't think I know.
It's a study of Genesis, defending the literal interpretation of Genesis.
Okay.
By Kinham.
Okay. Yeah.
And not only did I feel so good about like having arguments that my poor fellow teenage friends did not know how to respond to. I mean, like I felt like I was not only demolishing. I felt like I was demolishing them. It was such a power trip for me.
Oh yeah.
But eventually, I was introduced to philosophical arguments for and against the existence of God, because they bring up stuff like the problem of evil, and so there's like, because of younger creationism, I'm probably am where I am now.
I would say the same thing. Yeah, I would definitely say the same thing, because when I look at like my development and my thought, trying to wrestle with all the arguments against young Earth creationism, it taught me a lot about science, and it taught me a lot about biblical studies and philosophy and theology and history. So yeah, no, I would say the same thing. That seems fair.
Yeah, and the irony too is that a young Earth creationist might often know more science than the average U.S. citizen, right? Because isn't that kind of weird? Like,
well, I think it's funny, and then what I also appreciate is what I noticed when I was reading a lot of young Earth creationist literature back in the day was they understood the role of philosophy of science in this, and when I look at so Stephen Hawking, he co-authored this book before he died. I forgot who he co-authored it with, but he declared like philosophy is dead and science is the only torchbearer of truth left over. So it was like pretty controversial at the time, and he takes this completely anti-realist position to science, and I kind of looked at it and thought, like any young Earth creationist could do the same thing. They could just be like, yep, science, just be an anti-realist about all the science, like Stephen Hawking is. And then I can just affirm the young Earth view. And I'm like, yeah, okay. There's a rationality here. Like I can see the internal like kind of coherency here. And if anti-realism about science has good arguments, and it does have some good arguments, then like what some of the objections to young Earth creationism I think would go out the window.
Yeah, there's this distinction that Kinham makes that a lot of people hand waved, and it wasn't until I started looking into philosophy of science that I realized there's something to the distinction. You remember his distinction between observational science and historical science? I don't know if you ever.
It's been a long time since I read Ken Ham.
I didn't even read it. He just brings that distinction up.
Okay.
And a lot of, people that are responding to him think that's a really silly distinction to make. But then, like, when I was reading Jerry Fodor on evolutionary biology, he makes the distinction between, like, it's not as clear, but he thinks that there's a part of science called natural history, right? Where, because I think that, like, there's part of science is going after those strict laws or generalizations, those theories that you can use almost deductively, like when here's a gas law, okay, we can apply it in these cases, blah blah blah. And then there's trying to piece together the sort of things that happen in history that you can't generalize from like any kind of scientific theory put forth. And so that distinction, I'm like, oh my gosh, is Ken Ham was probably on to something in terms of, like, this distinction between, like, the laws and the what we're trying to do in getting to our theories and laws. And then there's the theories that we have in history, and a subset of those theories are our historical explanations in science. And so, like, why did the dinosaurs go extinct is more, you're not going to find a law of dinosaurs and meteors, right? You're just going to have to put together quite abductively what happened and not, like, pull deductively from, like, a law, so I don't know. I thought that was interesting to share. But
yeah, I think it's a really good point, because Bradley Monton in his Bradley Monton wrote this examination of intelligent design movement, like gosh, it would be a few decades, or like 15 years ago now, and he was one of Bos von Frossen's students. So Bos von Frossen was this, like, hardcore empiricist about science, and then an anti-realist about anything that you couldn't empirically observe. And I remember Bradley Monton making this comment about young Earth creationism and saying they've got a similar kind of philosophy of science that someone like von Frossen does, where it's like very hardcore empiricism, and if you can't empirically, like, observe it, then is it really science? Is it you just doing something else? So yeah, I can see, like, the sort of, I greatly appreciate that they understand there's a lot of philosophy of science going on in our science today.
Okay. Well, that brings us to, I want to talk about determinism and free will. So I heard you say that on some days, compatibilism might seem, well, I don't know how much background, guys, I'll just briefly explain. Some people think that if we have free will, then determinism must be false. Some people think that you can have free will, and it doesn't matter whether determinism is true or false. It's compatible with either case. And determinism being, I guess, like, there are several definitions of determinism, but I think the best definition I've seen is that, like, given facts about the remote past and maybe some other metaphysical facts, there's only one possible future. And I like that definition because then we don't have to talk about causes. But yeah, there's, like, basically one possible future given the remote past and fact. So you lean towards incompatibilism, right? So you lean towards the idea that, like, if we do have this genuine sense of free will, that you lean towards the idea that there could be, given the facts of the remote past and whatever other facts, there still could be multiple possibilities. Is that what you lean toward?
Yeah, because what you started to mention earlier is a thing I've said a lot, which is I go back and forth depending on what day of the week. If I'm going to be saying, like, free will is incompatible with determinism, or no, it is compatible. But some of the research I've been doing more recently has made me go incompatibilism. Like, and I can explain why in a minute. But yeah, I'm much more heavily leaning towards incompatibilism right now.
Okay. So the common, and it's specifically the libertarian side, because you could be a hard determinist, right?
Correct.
I'm assuming you're not going in that side. So you think there are cases where we do make free choices in the libertarian sense.
Yeah.
Right. Okay. And I guess my biggest issue here, I don't know if you've heard of the randomness objection. So basically, I might be fine with indeterminate causes, right? Like, so why did you choose to come on my YouTube channel? Well, because, maybe there's because you made that first, you were the first cause of your choice, and that's what, you know, led up to you making the choice to come on my channel. But it gets really weird when you ask the question, why did you choose to come to my YouTube channel rather than watch a movie? Because if you appeal to this first cause, you, the self, right, then I don't see how it would actually explain the difference in outcome, because I think like Mill and others pointed this out, that like if you have two different outcomes and you're trying to explain the difference, whatever explains that difference is going to show up in one of those outcomes and not the other. And I can elaborate on that if you need me to, but did you understand what I said?
Yeah. So let me make sure I'm following this. So one worry is, okay, I take freedom to be acting on the basis of reasons to achieve some kind of goal. So there's some sort of like goal that I want. I'm aiming at something. I've got a good reason for it. And sometimes the objection comes up of, well, why did you do that action instead of the other? And the worry is, well, I've got this thing that's completely unexplained, like why you did A instead of B, why I came on your show instead of going to like watch a movie. And so it's like, well, things are unexplained. That's randomness. It seems like maybe there's some sort of arbitrary incompleteness in the world. Like that's kind of the objection, right?
Right. And typically when we ask these kind of questions, like why did you do this rather than that, we usually have answers. We usually talk about these specific reasons that kind of explain one outcome, and given those reasons, the other outcome's not possible. But yeah, you got it. Absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah. So Robert Kane and Tim O'Connor have written on this a lot. And so their response goes a little something like this. This is not going to be perfect, but it goes a little something like this. When you're looking at the sort of nature of the cause in question, like some sort of choice that's being made, you should be able to predict that it's not going to be fully contrastive. That's just the nature of a free action. So if you're worried like, well, there's something arbitrary about it, you're like, no, that's just what a free action is. And what explains why it's that way is because, well, that's just the nature of free will. That's like, and so like, this is what O'Connor is going to say, and Kane is going to say. And then they'll go further and say, well, why did I come on this show instead of do something else? Well, the explanation is in the reasons that I gave to come on the show. That's why I did that action, for those reasons. And then you're like, well, but like, why not the other one? Those are some of the reasons. I'm like, those aren't the reasons I acted on. Like, I acted on these reasons. You want to know why I did this? Well, it's because of these reasons. That's that. And if you want a fully contrastive explanation, well, then you're asking for something that just violates the very idea of free will. And this is the way, like I said, like O'Connor and Kane are going to try to go.
Okay. So, would you say, so when you chose to come on my show, what would you say is the first cause to that?
So I don't think reasons are causes. I think reasons are explanations, because I think cause is just efficient causation. And so the only cause in this case would be me, the agent. Like I'm the thing that's bringing about, whatever effects, the effect of sitting down here, the effect of saying, yeah, I agree to come on your show, like those sort of things. Some people though, like Rebecca Rice, she thinks that reasons are causes, and like efficient causes. So it's not just in terms of just, I'm using cause in a vague way to mean explanations. She thinks like, no, the reasons actually do cause your action. And she thinks that's perfectly consistent with libertarian freedom, because lots of different reasons could cause lots of different ways, and being responsive to the causal influence of reasons, that's just what it means to be a rational agent.
Okay.
I'm less inclined towards that, but it's an interesting hypothesis, at least. So an interesting theory.
Yeah, so that brings up the interesting notion of non-causal explanations. I think there are such things. But I guess like when I think of examples of non-causal explanations, like why is it that the conclusion wasn't necessarily entailed? Well, because of the form of the argument and the fact that the premises are true. I mean, that's an explanation. And so but it seems like a lot of these examples though are like of non-causal explanations, or like explanations in logic and math. And I guess I think of, or maybe like in science, like why is that? I don't know, water have these certain properties because it's H2O or something like that. I don't know if that would be qualified as a non-causal explanation.
Uh, like why is water H2O?
So,
Yeah, because I think the answer is that's just what
or
water
rather,
is.
why does water have the property of being clear, right?
Oh, I see.
You know,
Yeah.
because they appeal to the molecular structure, but
Mhm.
water is that molecular structure. So it's weird. It's not like is it a self, like, you know, so like, I maybe I'm wrong. Maybe that's a terrible example, but like, so I'm fine. I'm definitely fine with non-causal explanations. But so would you see, maybe I'll give you my view. That way you
Mhm.
can have something that,
Sure.
like, rather than just what I just said, but maybe take into account what I just said there plus my view. So someone asked me, why is it that, you know, I decided to interview with Ryan Mullins rather than some other philosopher or whatever. Okay. Well, I'm going to appeal to my beliefs and desires. Okay.
Mhm.
And I take my beliefs and desires to be causally relevant, you know, in these situations when I make choices. And I take my beliefs and desires to be themselves reasons.
Mhm.
Okay. And so yeah, if you take that view, then it seems like reasons are causes. If you don't take that view, then it seems to me that your beliefs and desires don't really explain why you make one choice over another, and that's what I'm seeing.
Mhm. Yeah, I mean that's basically Rebecca Rice's position is that when she's trying to say like I've got this belief desire complex, that's why sometimes philosophers talk about these emotions and so on. They'll say like that's just what causes your action. Um, whereas I feel like it's definitely explaining my action. I just don't know if it's causing it because I've got lots of beliefs and they don't cause anything as far as I can tell.
Mhm.
So I've got the belief that there's an electron floating next to your left elbow. Like that's it's not really causing much of anything. I wasn't even really thinking about it until just now. And I've got a desire to know lots of things, and I
Is
don't
it your
act on it.
position that a reason, it can't be a cause? Can it be a cause?
I'm inclined to say it cannot be a cause; it's just an explanation.
But you think
But
beliefs can be causes?
I don't know, because I think when I say like your belief that such and such is the case caused you to act, I feel like I'm using cause in a really loose way instead of in terms of like an efficient cause, like something that produces. Because I think that only concrete objects can produce things in terms of like efficient causation. And I don't know if I want to say beliefs. Some people think beliefs are concrete. Others say they're abstract, and I don't know. I just don't know.
Okay. Because I
Yeah.
guess maybe one way to put it, in, I'm going to pretty much say the same thing in different
Mhm.
terms to really get at my anxiety here. So I want to, when I haven't made a choice yet,
Mhm.
and I want to make a choice, and I'm in a kind of a deliberative stage, right? So now I think we could agree that in some sense we're weighing our reasons, right?
Mhm.
Now, on my view, I'm weighing my beliefs and desires, right? So I
Mhm.
desire, you know, I want to make a lot of money, but I freaking hate, you know, science, or really, I would hate going to medical school because it's too much studying. And I'm
Mhm.
weighing all of my desires, and then, you know, at least on my view, at the end of the deliberation, I've made a judgment, okay, based on my act of deliberation, and now I look at that as a causal process, and so then, but at the end of it, by which I make a judgment of what I ought to do, and then I go ahead and make a choice.
Mhm.
And so, if it's the case that reasons, in fact, explain why I make one judgment over another, one choice to another, and if reasons are not causes, and if yet all that deliberative stuff that I'm thinking about is all causal, then it seems what happens there is that deliberation doesn't explain why you make one judgment or one choice over another. And that seems crazy to me.
Mhm. Okay, so I want to make sure I'm understanding the worry just right. So, if this deliberative process is not a causal process, then it doesn't seem like it's explaining because the only kind of explanation is causal. I'm assuming that's not why you're wanting to say that last part.
Well, I mean, it goes down. I mean, I'm kind of voicing my view. My view is that when we're deliberating, we're weighing what we want,
Mhm.
our commitments about
Right.
what we think is true, and that stuff. I'm feeling that as explanatory. I think you're fine with appealing to that as explanatory, but you want
Oh,
to
yeah.
okay. But then where I think where we're kind of splitting here is whether it's a causal explanation.
Exactly.
Okay. And so maybe that, this is why I like to determine when I gave that definition of determinism, I avoided causal talk, right?
Yeah.
But it could be that, for all I know, is that we could compare our theories of causation, and we might actually just end up agreeing. But, I mean, okay, so would you say would you say like dogs desire things?
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay,
It
so
seems like they definitely do.
dog desire to jump on the table, right?
Mhm.
Would you say that desire is a cause?
I feel, yeah, again, because I don't think desires necessarily cause. I think they
Okay,
explain. Yeah. So yeah, I think all the cases you're going to give, I'll just be like, right, this is not going to help pump my intuitions in the way you want.
okay,
So I guess I'm curious if the issue really comes down to, can there be explanations that are not causal? And if that's the case, then if the answer is yes, then we're like, okay, now we have to look at the special case of deliberations and reasons.
hmm
What's the reason for thinking that reasons are causes? If it's the case that there can be things that explain without being causes.
or it might just be that, like, I have something very different in mind when I say cause than you
Mhm.
do.
Yeah,
But I'm not prepared to I have a theory of causation. I'm not prepared to
sure.
give you
That's
a theory.
which because it's tricky. It's a very tricky
Yeah.
area, and the literature's boring. It's so
But now I
boring.
see, like, if we were to talk about it again, I see where, where we put a bookmark. I want to put a
Yeah,
bookmark here, and now I know exactly if we're to ever resolve what might seem like a disagreement, then it'd be somewhere here with like
yeah,
causes and explanations and beliefs and desires relating to all of that. But that's interesting. I'm
Mhm.
glad I've because it could be that, like, your definition of cause, like, beliefs and desires aren't causes, they're explanations, and which, I may look at what you have to say about causation and then say, well, yeah, then under that notion of causation, beliefs and desires aren't. So, but I'm not prepared to do that. So but now I know where to go
Mhm.
next time. All right. Do you have anything else to say about that?
No, no.
Okay. Um, so I, let's talk about compatibilism. So I gave my what's wrong with compatibilism, man? Like what? So let me give you my
Mhm.
classical understanding of compatibilism, and you can tell me why on some days it just seems completely implausible. So first of all, I think you would accept this, and I don't think. Well, first of all, I want to say that libertarians could accept other senses of free will. They're just not going to be the libertarian kind, right? Like, I feel
Uh,
like
so okay. So this is a common confusion. So there's free will, whatever that is, and you got to just define that. And then the question comes up: is that whatever that thing is, free will? Is that consistent or compatible with determinism? Um, and so sometimes you'll get these debates of going, well, I'm a compatibilist because I don't think that free will involves the ability to do otherwise. And I want to go, well, the compatibilist, at least classically in the Western world, thought freedom involved the ability to do otherwise. So this clearly can't be right. And then I've got a bunch of libertarians run around saying like, I'm a sourcehood libertarian. I'm just, as long as I'm the source of my action,
mhm,
that's all that matters. If I don't have the ability to otherwise, it doesn't matter. So I think there's a lot of confusion in these debates because it surrounds these issues. So you got to first define what free will is, whatever that is. You think you're the source of your action, and you've got the ability to otherwise. These are common kind of accounts. And then is that consistent with um, being causally determined? Because you could say free will is just acting for reasons. That's it. End of story. And then you'd be like, well, yeah, I'm caused because reasons are causes. There we go. Compatibilism. Totally fine.
mhm,
And I just want to go, well, I just don't think that's the end of the story of free will. And so that's why I would quibble about that kind of stuff.
mhm. Yeah,
Yeah.
I might come off as like oversimplifying everything or what I'm about to say, but like, to me, all I need to make sense of my statements when I say that person is free or not is, are they doing what they really want to do or ideally want to do?
Mhm.
I want to think of freedom as like being unimpeded in what
Mhm.
you really want to do. I want to read you something. Do you know this philosopher named, I think it's Hugh Price?
Oh yeah.
Yeah, he really said something that really stuck with me, and unfortunately I took out the book and I've misplaced it. But it was only a paragraph, and I thought that I wanted to get his. I'll just have to paraphrase it. Okay, so be patient with me. It's basically it was in the context of God and goodness and problem of evil. So imagine you have this thing, you give the libertarians what they want. They got this, free will. You can freely will what, that you got that, right? So, but every time you freely will to do something, God would step in and cause you to fail.
Mm-hmm.
So like I freely will, play video games. Well, then God just shuts down your internet like he did probably, a couple hours and I just got power back. Right. So, okay. So I'm frustrated. I freely willed to play video games, but I failed. Right. Mm-hmm. Okay, fine. I'll freely will to go to sleep. Right. Well, then God gives me some kind of ailment or not. Let's just whatever. Maybe it's a Job case. I don't know. But some supernatural being is like making it to where I can't sleep. Right. And but I freely willed to, right? And so every time I freely will, I just end up failing because of some external intervention. Mm-hmm. And so then the question, let's say the supernatural being gives me a choice. Look, I'm going to cause you to have all sorts of intentions. Here's the list, right? And it's like the same kind of list, the same stuff that I had freely willed earlier, mm-hmm. right? But I'm going to be the cause of that stuff. But in this case, I'm going to allow you to succeed with respect to each of these intentions. I feel like I'm more free in that world than the world where I wasn't mm-hmm. the source of these intentions. Mm-hmm. Where I was the source, right? So in other words, I would make the reason why I lean towards compatibilism is because I would make that trade. I'm less concerned about what explains why I have these, I guess, base desires, base beliefs about what's good and what I should do, and more concerned about completing those commitments. Mm-hmm. What do you think about what I've said?
So there's two issues in here that we need to two concepts in here we need to distinguish. So there's free will, and then there's freedom of choice. And so freedom of will I take to be you've got this power to be the source of your actions for some sort of reason, and it's goal oriented and all that jazz, and you've got the ability to do otherwise. And then freedom of choice is when you actually have options and you could do A or not A. So free will is supposed to be like this kind of ability that you have. And then freedom of choice is sort of kind of like your circumstances. So
can I get a clarification? You define free will in terms of the principle of alternate possibilities? Is that?
Yeah, because I think that's, because this happens a lot in a lot of these discussions. So I'm just thinking of like this recent debate I read from Robert Kane and Carolina Sartoro. And so you're the source of your actions. And it's supposed to be incompatible in the sense of like, you don't have to do, unless you've got these completely overriding reasons, like, because that might happen every now and then where the reasons are just so overwhelming. Like you that's all you've got to do. But so this is a power that you have, but the freedom of choice is supposed to be something about your circumstance gives you the opportunity to actually exercise this power. So the Hugh Price case that you're talking about, where I've got this power, like I could do stuff for reasons and I could act on the basis of reasons, but I never actually like get the opportunity to make a choice, because every time I try, like God steps in or an evil scientist steps in, or, like all these different kind of like Frankfurt sort of style scenarios. And so that I think is a case where your freedom of choice is gone. You've got the power, but you just never have the opportunity to exercise your power in any sort of meaningful way. And that sucks, right? Whereas when you start talking about, well, what if God determines me to have the desires that I have, and then I get to act on them? And you're like, well, right. So now we switch the topic from freedom of choice to the freedom of the will, to actually have the ability to reflect on reasons myself. Do I have the ability to really weigh and deliberate and then make a decision? Whereas God just causing me, Ryan, these are the only reasons you can have, and I'm causing your action, and I'm causing, all this kind of stuff.
Okay, so
and I can give some more details on that if you want, but yeah, I think it's it's two separate questions that we're asking.
Okay, so the what I've read about this free will stuff is that okay. First of all, it seems like you're defining free will in terms of the principle of alternate possibilities. People do that. I get that.
That's part of it, but also sourcehood.
And also, so you take those are the two. It sounds like you're defining free will as libertarian free will, but
that's what the classical compatibilists did too. This is what they did as well. Like they said, so like when you're looking at Mill, you're looking at like all the Calvinists, for example. This is what they do, and this gets pointed out all the time in the literature. So I'm just going, cool. That's what you think free will
definition. I'll propose a definition. Okay, being free or having free will is being in control. Okay, what do you think? Because I think that because let's say, I know we talked about the randomness stuff and we're not settled on there. But what I want to argue is that your two conditions of libertarianism undermine control. But let's say I'm wrong about that. Let's just look at the case of the Price case, right? Like here I'm and I want a quick clarification. Would you say someone that, let's say someone doesn't like Ryan Mullins and they try to kill Ryan Mullins, but when they aimed the gun, they missed. Did they make a choice there?
Yeah. I mean, they aimed the gun. They attempted to try to kill me because we have that clear category, right? Attempted murder. Okay,
because earlier you said that like you couldn't make a choice because someone is not like you.
Yeah, I should back up then a bit. So all I was trying to do was clarify the difference between freedom of will and freedom of choice.
Okay.
And then there's also this other separate issue of all these Frankfurt cases that you're mentioning, like where it looks like your freedom of choice is gone. Is it fully gone? And there's this view called the flicker of freedom, where you've got this brief moment where you did. And
Fisher
did exercise. Yeah, Martin Fisher does this. A lot of people do this. I think that's right. I really do. So let's go back to the God case where like you want to play a video game, but God's like, watch this. As soon as Danny goes to like press start, I'm just going to make the power cut out. And it's like, well, what prompted God to do it in that moment is you made a choice to play a video game.
Exactly.
If you did not make that choice, then God would not have cut the power. And so you've got this brief flicker of freedom is the way the argument's supposed to go. And so the claim is this is supposed to show that like leeway or the alternate possibilities is still in place in terms of judging whether or not you're morally responsible, which comes back to your earlier question of, well, what if it's just control? What if that's all free will is, like control enough to be morally responsible? Well, that's where all the philosophers will want to sit down and go, all right, let's analyze what it means to have control. And that gets us back to, are you the source of your actions? Are you deliberating? Do you have these options? Do you have the ability to do all these different things? Do you have these powers? That's usually
right.
Yeah, and then also success.
So like in the case of the Hugh Price case, the whole story I gave, would you say I was in control in that situation?
I don't think you've got a sufficient amount of control to have any significant, like weighty moral actions, but you've got such a minuscule amount of control that it's hard to really say, man, Danny's this really autonomous being.
Yeah, but it seems like I've got your two criteria though.
Yeah. So you'd have that, but is it? But it's okay. There's a couple different questions in here. Then, do you have the libertarian freedom? I'm like, yeah, you've got it. But
who cares though? I don't want that.
Right. Because if your options are being thwarted all the time, then it's like, cool, great, this sucks. And so I think the issue there then is not, do I have libertarian freedom? It's really like, how much choice do I actually have? How much autonomy do I actually have? How much options do I have to exercise my power?
Okay. And
so I think that's the issue.
Agreement between us is that I want to talk about control, right? And I think as a litmus test to whether I have freedom or free will, and I know that there's like freedom of choice, freedom of action, freedom, free will, like these are, I know, distinguished all over the literature and sometimes not distinguished all over the literature. But yeah, I mean, I would just say, look, if I'm choosing, if God says, look, there are these intentions, there's a possible world where you're the first cause of those intentions or those choices, and there's a possible world where but then you fail with respect to every single intention, and there's a possible world where I determine your intentions and I allow your intentions, then the base ones that you have, the most fundamental ones to you, your person to succeed. What world would I rather be in? Well, I'd rather be in the latter world because that's the world that I feel like I have control. But I think that's my last word on this, and I'll give you, and then we'll move on to the next topic.
I guess I want to say both of these worlds suck because in the first world, I've got this the actual power of free will, but like I can't do anything meaningful with it. All I can do is like perform an action to just the extent to which God's going to go ha ha ha, and that just sucks. Whereas in the other world, I'm like I don't even have. I feel like I don't actually have the power of free will because God's causing me to have the beliefs and desires that I have. And then if you really want to go with like the more traditional account of like theological determinism, God's also causing my actions too. So it's like I feel like both of these worlds suck like quite significantly. Yeah, I don't know. I guess that's all I have to say on that.
Okay, wait. I said that I lied. Okay,
Yeah.
let me ask. Okay, so again, I'm going to present the world, but I'm going to add a little bit of a caveat. So in both worlds, you have the intentions that you have now, your desires, or let me say intentions, preferences, desires, all of that stuff. Okay, the beliefs about what you think is good, maintain. Okay, but in one world, you're responsible for them in the libertarian sense. God is not the cause of them. In the other world, God is the cause of them. But the difference between these worlds is just whether you succeed or fail with respect to your whatever you think ought to occur. Is there a preference for you in terms of what world would you rather be in?
If I'm consistently thwarted, then I feel like my intentions are, in one sense, very irrelevant. And then if God's causing me to have my intentions, then there's nothing meaningful in terms of like me intending to do anything in that world. Yeah, so I feel like again, like these just are pretty terrible worlds.
Okay, but in one world, you see, like if it were me, like if I have, let's just say, I'm such a liar, because if it were me, because I have the hope that no one goes hungry, I have the belief that people that getting healthcare is good. I have all those beliefs, right? And let's say we're in your world, and I'm the first cause of having all those beliefs or desires or intentions, hopes, whatever. Okay, I'm responsible for them in the libertarian sense, at least. But that world, I don't. We're in the world where those don't attain, right? But in the other world, right, where God then gives me those exact same beliefs they're determined for me, right? But then suddenly, if He allows for for me to meet my ends, there is no world hunger, right? There is, people have healthcare, and then suddenly everything is in accord with the intentions that I have, and I feel like I'd rather be in that world, at least, even if it's not, I am kind of changing the subject a little bit,
yeah.
Right. But I'm just saying, even if it were, you're saying they're equally as bad with respect to the issue of free will, but one, right? We have like a perfect world with respect to my ideals. So I would rather be in that world.
So if the issue is, should I have a world where I've got libertarian, like creatures with libertarian free will, but they can't succeed at anything. Like it's like God just sets it up that it's impossible for them to ever succeed, versus a world where there's no libertarian freedom whatsoever, but everybody's a perfectly shiny, happy creature. Nothing ever goes wrong because God always determines that's the way it goes. Like, yeah, like I can see in a sense why like that world would be better than the other world. Just relative to that other world. Yeah.
And what I would want to say is that, remember, the what ends up happening and as a result from the preferences, desires, beliefs that I have are from those intentional states. And the evaluation of control and goodness is going to be relativized to those intentional states. So that's so because I would want to say, maybe you're not prepared to say that in the world where God determines my intentions, I wasn't in control of those intentions, right? But then if those intentions then explain other actions that I take to complete that will, and then I succeed, then the sense of control there is indexed back to those original intentions that I'm not in control over, if that makes any sense.
Yeah, The worry I have with a world like this is no creature has any moral worth to their actions,
Mhm.
because what's explaining the action is entirely in the hands of God. Um, and so this is like a you're gonna get into like some of the stuff I know you want to talk about with the
Mhm.
problem of evil, but yeah, that's the complaint that I would have is, are you really doing anything meaningful or of any sort of moral significance? Because your action is being causally explained by the intentions, and the intentions are being causally explained by God. So you just did what you were programmed to do.
Mhm.
And it's like, oh, well, in one sense, it's really cool because, like, hey, it's a cool universe, right? But in terms of having a universe with creatures that can make their own morally significant actions, you're not. I don't think you're going to have that value in that world. But obviously, you're going to have other values. All the values you pointed out, those are there.
Mhm.
Like, cool, everybody gets to do what they're programmed to do, and nothing ever goes wrong, and everybody's fed, and everybody's happy. They're all perfectly shiny, happy people. Yeah.
Yeah. So I think that if we were to return that, I of course I think a lot of this is coming from my anxieties about the randomness objection and stuff
Mhm.
like that. And so, given that that's not your anxiety, you're quite comfortable with the word programmed. I'm quite comfortable with on a non-coerced cause
Mhm.
because like uh, as the kind of compatibilist I am is I'm not so concerned about causes themselves. I'm concerned about coercive causes.
Mhm.
And so if God causes me to have an intention whereby I don't have an intention to not have that intention, that's a cause, but it's a non-coercive cause. But you would use the language of like being programmed. And I think that that can only be resolved by going back to the issues that I said we believe like 5 minutes
Yeah.
ago. But
Yeah. Yeah.
I'm going to, if it's okay, I like to move on to the
Mhm.
moral stuff and the evil
Sure.
stuff.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, first question: do you think God is the ground of morality?
I go back. This is an issue I really do go back and forth on.
Mhm.
So there's what I'll call the moral landscape, and so the moral landscape is going to contain lots of different things. Like, are there moral facts? And I want to say, yeah, there's definitely those. And then character, like virtuous and vicious character, moral propositions, moral properties that attach to actions, that attach to intentions. Um, all the different kinds of values that are moral values, not just because there's a lot of values that are not moral values. But all these things are going to be in the moral landscape. Obligations, supererogatory actions. Does God fully explain all of that? And this is where I kind of go, I don't know. And here's why. So I think there are necessary moral truths, like certain truths that are very, very fundamental. According to John Duns Scotus, they're so basic that they wouldn't even fill out the Ten Commandments. Like, that's how basic they are. I don't know if I want to go that far, but like some moral truths I just take to be necessarily the case. It is wrong to torture an innocent person for without any justification. I don't even know if you could have justification for torturing an innocent person. I just want to say it's just wrong to torture an innocent person. Full stop. That's necessarily true. Well, what explains that? Well, when you just think about what it means to torture something and what it means to be an innocent person, that's the explanation. What more do I need? And when you get to necessary truths, a lot of philosophers want to say that's where explanation bottoms out. Like, there's nothing more to explain when you've got something that's truly, absolutely necessary.
Mhm.
Um, then you got some people who want to say, well, okay, well, no, God's going to explain that. I'm like, what exactly is God explaining in this case with the necessary moral truths? I think God could explain lots of other things about the moral landscape, but that's the area where I'm like, I don't really see exactly how we're getting God explaining this thing about necessary moral truths.
Okay. It sounds like on the first hand that you're a moral realist. Is that
Mhm.
correct?
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah.
But in terms of going back and forth, you go back and forth in terms of like the nature of those facts, in terms of their grounding and their explanation and
Yeah.
whatnot. Is that correct?
Yeah, because I think I think there are contingent moral facts, and those need explanations. So in America, we're in America at the moment, so it's wrong to drive on the left side of the road, and that's a contingent moral fact because we didn't have to set up our laws that way. But what you've got there is a mixture of some non-moral facts, like the government at some point made a decision. This is the way we're going to organize society. It's not really a moral thing, mixed with moral facts about responsibility to not cause harm to people. And so you can start coming up with an explanation for how we came about with this contingent moral fact. That has an explanation. But if I get down to something like rock bottom, like don't cause unnecessary harm, well, it's a necessary truth. And so I'm like, why does that need to be grounded? I don't understand.
Okay, so I'm a very rabid anti-realist.
Okay.
Well, very very rabid. So, but okay. But first of all, I'm fine with saying stuff. Notice saying, okay,
Mhm.
that like torturing babies for fun is immoral. But really, what I'm just expressing there is that I think that it's wrong or should not happen. It gets. What do you think? Look, I look at this distinction between morally wrong and wrong, especially when it comes to our actions, because I understand we could have rightness and wrongness with respect to rationale and epistemic, then the epistemic scope, right? There's like rightness and wrongness there. I'm not talking about with respect to rationality or epistemology, but so much as like practical rationality. So I guess okay, let me capture what I'm saying. Okay. So I have I should go. I have to get to work today. It's the right thing to do. The good thing to do is to get in my car and turn on the ignition. Now, no one is going to say. I wouldn't even say that is morally right or morally obligatory.
Mhm.
And I get that. I get that there's some kind of distinction. Whereas like eating babies on Thursdays for fun or whatever I said. It seems like it's more appropriately deemed as immoral or it's morally wrong. Okay. But I struggle like hell to differentiate between mere practical rationality in the case of like turning the ignition to your car to get to work and then like not eating babies or not torturing innocent people, blah, blah, blah. And I'm fine with using the language, but you see, this is like very similar to like moral facts as distinguished from like the right thing to do, right? Because being moral is not simply the right thing to do. As like facts about chivalry. There's like what you should do, and then there's like the right thing to do if you're chivalrous, so like I find myself it's very difficult to find the set of necessary and sufficient conditions for a act that's chivalrous. Although I could say, a knight saving a damsel in distress on tower from a dragon, I would say that's chivalrous. Whereas like saving a drowning kid from a pool it's chivalrous it's not high on the chivalrous spectrum, but they're both like really good, and I think they're both things that you should do. And so when I'm prepared to jettison, right, like, or at least if you want to differentiate between right action and morally right action, I'm prepared to jettison that from philosophy, right? And I just really want to talk about what should I do, right, in this situation, not what is the morally right thing to do, because then when you put morally right thing to do, then there's other senses of what I ought to do that could potentially trump. Why is it that the moral oughts trump the chivalrous oughts, right? Like having and so that's one of my concerns.
Yeah, so there's a lot of people who are moral realists who will say it's that the moral facts do not always trump when you're trying to figure out like what the right thing to do is, or what you should do, or your reasons, the way your reasons stack up, because sometimes it might be the case that like reasons of self-interest, those might trump some moral considerations. Yes, the other values might come into play. So I feel like at the moment, it seems to me what all you've pointed out is it's really hard to figure out what you should do in any given situation, because lots of different considerations are at play. But you're wanting to say something stronger, though, right? You're wanting to say the moral consideration, where does that, what is the difference between any other kind of rational consideration and a moral consideration?
Well, look, okay, so, and to be fair, I rambled a little bit, so I blame
it's all
myself
right.
here.
We all do this.
Yeah, so look, I think that it is a very interesting question to ask, what is the good life? What should I do in this dilemma? Should I save, in the Good Samaritan case, should I help the the person on the side of the road, or should I get to work on time? These are very good questions, and we can talk about them, and I think there can be good answers to that. But when we inject this term moral and differentiate it from the broad question of what should I do, what are we adding? Now, I'll tell you my position when I was a theist. I thought that right or wrong action, that moral had to do with God's direct commands, right? Like, or something like that. Although, that's how I like, okay, that's how I differentiate between what I ought to do versus what I ought to do in the moral dimension. But I wonder how perhaps the answer, if you had to ask me now, I would say, look, I think this notion of moral is kind of confused. It's just as confused as, well, I shouldn't say confused, but it's sort of nebulous as chivalry. And so I don't, and I'm saying it's nebulous as chivalry. And the second thing is that, do we even need it? Right? Like, when we're asking questions about what I ought to do, we still agree that all things considered, you ought to not eat babies, or you ought to help the person on the side of the road. Why do we need to add this extra dimension of morality, I guess?
So there's a couple different issues to distinguish here. So one is like, what really makes an action morally right or wrong? And then how do you know it? So the metaphysical and the epistemological question. And then there's this other question of like, I've just got all these different reasons. Like, why do I need to have this extra category of moral in there? That one I find easier to answer. And the answer is, people just have overwhelmingly seem to have these intuitions that there are certain things that are just moral categories. Like, certain things just fall into the realm of moral, like the baby eating case being one of them. And then when people have those intuitions, and a lot of people do, then they go to that first set of questions of, well, hang on, what exactly makes these things? Like, what is the metaphysics of morality? And then what's the epistemic, like the epistemology? How do I know it? So it's starting with, we've got these intuitions. Now let's go to the metaphysics and epistemology. That's usually how it goes. It's not neat. It's definitely very, very messy. And this is why I don't do a lot of work in moral philosophy, is because I've got enough on my hands with all the philosophy time stuff I'm doing, because it's a very messy area. And a lot of it really does rely on intuitions.
So, yeah, I want to differentiate between like the metaethical question about the nature of morality versus like the more normative, like in normative theories, they're looking for that secret ingredient, right? So like in the chivalry case, right? So I think that, in Shrek, when he tried to save Fiona in Shrek 1, right? That was very chivalrous. They had the great music. What made it a chivalrous scenario? Well, I can point to the castle and the tower up there. I can point to the dragon. I can point to the knight, the shining armor and all this stuff. And those things might, make it such that I will say, hey, that's what a chivalrous event, right? Like, and someone will understand me. But what does chivalry mean exactly, right? So I guess maybe you don't differentiate between that, but what does moral exactly mean is different than what makes that context in a way where we would say that it's moral, like the particular, I guess, descriptive facts, like the knight in shining armor and the tower and the dragon.
Yeah, I mean, there is this distinction between normative ethics and like meta ethics, but what explains the normative ethics is usually the meta ethics. Like, do you think that the good is just maximizing utility? Do you think the good is the set of virtuous character traits like chivalry? Okay, well then that's going to then you're developing your normative theory around that. So that's why that's why I don't know how to answer the normative questions without going, well, okay, this is really weird. I've got this intuition that this is what's going on, but now I got to do the really hard work of meta ethics.
Do you think there are facts about chivalry?
I don't know. I definitely want to say there's like some sort of set of virtues, and maybe chivalry falls in there, but I don't know how to divide up the virtues. I've seen all these different ways of dividing up the virtues and vices, and they all sound kind of cool to me, but it's to be honest, it's not something I put a lot of thought in. So like, I know like Aristotle's got his set, and then more recently I was reading like Scotus, like the way Scotus tries to divide it all up, and Thomas Ward in his introduction to Scotus's philosophy, he has this whole like really intricate, really interesting diagram of how you divide up all the virtues and vices, and I'm just like, I guess that's cool, thanks, bro. I
Okay,
just
so I
don't know.
think you and I have the same view about chivalrous facts because I'm
Mhm.
not that interested in chivalry facts, but
Right.
you and I would agree that like the Shrek one, that's more chivalrous than like saving a kid from a pool, like from drowning from a pool. Would you say? Because chivalry has this. Maybe I'm wrong, or maybe some other like giving to the Red Cross. Oh, no, that's not good.
Mhm.
I'm thinking of some benign good action that would be
Sure.
moral.
Yeah.
I'm
Some
not
charity
using
that
this
you know is
example.
not corrupt.
Right.
You
So,
know.
like, let's say you and I went back in a time machine to, like, 12, medieval, like 1100s, 10, I don't know,
Mhm.
10th century, something, I don't know. And they're very committed to the facts about chivalry. There are chivalry facts. I bet we could find somebody that said there are such facts and
Mhm.
they're very clear, right? Like,
Yeah.
they are necessary, right?
Yeah.
And all the stuff you said about morality, right? And we'd be like, well, okay, we see. I think you and I would agree. Like, okay, Mr. Knight, I would use the language of what you're doing to this damsel in distress or how you're
Mhm.
helping her. We're fine with Ryan and I are fine with calling that a chivalrous case, right?
Mhm.
But number one, why do we need chivalry to help us out when we're just asking the broad question about what ought I do?
Yeah. So this is what it sounds like. This is an issue of what exactly is the best moral language, like to carve reality at its joints. Because chivalry might just be, it's a really good way to kind of capture a lot of things that people in the Middle Ages were saying, but there's a lot of other moral categories that they are associating with it. That when we start looking at other cultures, we can go, okay, well, they agree on that set of moral virtues. They just don't call it chivalry, or some of the baggage, some of like the sociological baggage attached to chivalry. They don't have it, but they've all got this kind of underlying set of like virtues and stuff. Okay, so maybe something in there is what we need. Like that's how way a lot of moral philosophers will try to look at these sort of cases. Um, and in which case, then you might be able to make a case. We don't need chivalry. We need the stuff that's underlying all of this.
Mhm,
Because what makes something chivalrous? You're like, well, like bravery. I'm like, okay, well, that's
mhm,
a lot of people like that. That's pretty standard in virtues. Helping out people in need. Okay. So we've got some sort of obligatory action, or maybe it's not obligatory, maybe it's supererogatory. And then I'm like, okay, well, I've got a set of different moral. Again, we're trying to capture the moral landscape,
mhm.
and chivalry seems like it captures some stuff, doesn't capture all of it, but nor is it intended to. But do I need the category of chivalry? Maybe not, because I'm all chivalry's doing is capturing things in the moral landscape that the ideal moral theory will do anyway.
Yeah, and so like if someone asked me, like if again this knight said, "Look,
Mhm.
I'll tell you what chivalry is. Chivalry is just the right thing to do." Okay. Oh, I believe that there are right things to do. So I believe in chivalry facts, right?
Mhm.
And I feel like when someone says, "Oh, well, Danny, why are you so skeptical of morality?" Wait. Hold up. If by morality all you mean, if by saying something is moral or something's immoral, is just simply an expression of what you ought to do or you ought not to do, right? I believe in moral facts, right? I mean, of course, in an anti-realist sense, but nonetheless, they're facts that depend on the stances or mind or whatever you want
Mhm.
to say. That's I get. So I just want to clarify that I'm not against like morality. If you're saying that morality is just simply a function of what you ought to do, and I think that a lot of cases, like when I use the word, and then there are cases where I kind of infuse like so I've been in cases where I'm like that's deeply immoral, like,
Mhm.
and then they're
Yeah.
like, okay, Danny, but you said that you're not about morality. I'm like, well, look, in this context, I'm using the term to not only say that what you did, you should have done, but I'm adding something else about my emotional state, my anger, what I would do to you, right? Like the way I would punish you. I'm injecting that stuff, but I don't expect anybody to take like a theory from that, right? I'm just
Mhm.
using a term moral to kind of convey my emotional state and what I want to do to you if you don't do what I think you should do. And I'm not committed to using that term uniformly, right? And so I just wanted to clarify my position. It's not like
Mhm.
I see the way that people use the term moral and moral morality exactly the way that people use the term chivalry. I think there is a big disanalogy in terms of how the terms are used. But in
Mhm.
terms of the theory that underlies it, I see, the philosophy that underlies it. I actually, if you want to distinguish between morally wrong and wrong, then I see the problem kind of bubbling up. Just to
So
clarify my position.
yeah, so I want to ask a question about this. When you're when you're making like this sort of like, oh, this is immoral, you're expressing your emotions. Is part of what you're wanting to
In
say?
that context, but
Yeah.
sometimes
Yeah.
I'm using moral and not to do that. The
Sure.
point is that I'm just telling you my personal usage of the terms, right? sometimes I'm being facetious, like when
Sure.
some like
Yeah.
obviously we could use but you're wanting to say that moral tracks something out there,
Yeah.
right? Whereas I'm saying the way I use the terms, I'm like I could be tracking something descriptive. I could be talking about my emotional state. I could be and so in a way like I just don't I I don't think that when I use the term moral that I'm committed to any particular theory of morality.
Mhm. Oh, yeah. I mean, I don't think most people are when they make a moral claim. I don't think they're committed to any sort of particular
Mhm.
theory because metaethics is really hard. It's really niche. Most people don't do that. So, like, I know my grandmother never studied metaethics, and so, but she made lots of moral claims. So she's definitely not relying on some specific theory. But what I was curious about though was the emotion bit, because if it's just me like emoting at the world, emotions are supposed to track reality in some sort of way, because we can judge emotions by whether or not they fit the situation. There's like different standards of correctness, and so that has this interesting like kind of connection
Mhm.
to like moral realism, for example. So Fabrice Tironi and Julian, oh, what is Julian's last name? I forgot. Their introduction to emotions is just called Emotions, an introduction. So it's very simple. What they do is they point out like the pretty standard view of emotions today is that emotions have some sort of cognitive element to them. They're trying to represent something about your circumstance. They're evaluating your circumstance in some particular way. You're evaluating that like a barking dog is scary. You're evaluating that this movie was like really cool or really boring. There's certain values that your emotions are tracking, and what justifies your emotion is if it fits the situation really well, and what makes your emotion correct is if it fit how well it fits the situation. There's some other dimensions of correctness, but that's the one that's important for the moment. Is that there is something that the emotions are cognitive. They're trying to capture something about your circumstance. And so with a moral case, the way it fits in with the moral case is certain things like you're upset about something because you're like, there's something that's disvalue in this situation, something that's really grievous. Uh, and a moral realist is going to be like, right, like you're acknowledging, you're recognizing, you're perceiving some sort of disvalue in this circumstance, and that would be a mind independent fact that your emotion is recognizing or failing to recognize. I mean, because that happens a lot.
Yeah, so let's start with agreement.
Mhm.
I do think there's an evaluative quality of emotion. So, like, I'm angry at
Mhm.
something. I'm evaluating that something as, in the case of anger, bad. Right? It would be hard to understand if I'm not evaluating the situation as bad, but yet I'm very angry about it. That'd be hard to understand for me. So I'm with you there, but and I'm also with you with the value thing. But I think in terms of the in terms of the terms,
Mhm.
I'm fine with using the language of saying that in, let's say, anger, there's an evaluation. So I'm expressing, there is something that you're saying that the value is out there that I have an attitude about, right?
Mhm.
But an anti-realist could say something like, well, no, the evaluation itself is just an expression of my value, or I don't want to be committed to a specific type of projectivism, but like the idea is that like I find what you're doing right here disvaluable,
Mhm.
and all I mean by that is that I don't desire it. That's still an evaluation, right? Because I think desires are themselves normative. Maybe you disagree with that, but um, and that's all I need to make sense of emotions without appealing to a moral without appealing to moral realism.
Yeah, because if emotions just are like felt evaluations, which is a kind of sort of like standard baseline agreement on from a lot of philosophers of emotion. Yeah, you just need values that exist in
Okay.
the world, and then you could
Are you
debate
saying
whether
the
or not they're
values are in the
moral.
world, right?
Yeah, yeah, exactly. Because emotions, they do like. There's a sense in which emotions definitely reveal what you subjectively care about, because your emotions are grounded in what your cares and concerns are. But one of the ways we judge like the rationality of emotions is how well they fit with the world. So if emotions are all they're doing is just revealing just your own subjective values,
Mm.
then the standard way we correct emotions is gone. So there's a lot of times like okay, like I'll just give you some meaningless or not meaningless slogans, but like a lot of standard like slogans like there's no use in crying over spilt milk. And when you're like, well, why do we say that? You're like, well, because the situation at the moment is slightly upsetting, but it's not like so upsetting you should cry. Like, come on, just chill for a minute. Or when we see like something really terrible happen to our loved ones or people we care about, and we see the authorities not doing anything at all, like we start judging that their emotions are just not, their emotions or actions are just not right. They're not evaluating the situation correctly. They should be angry, they should be upset, and they're not. And so they're like, something's wrong with you. We make these are kind of the common evaluations we make. So every day, like you wake up in the morning, and it doesn't matter if you're like politically conservative or politically liberal, one of the newspapers is going to say, this is what you need to be angry about right now. Like this is how you sell like your media. What are we doing there? We're making some kind of evaluation about people's morals, like, or about their emotions. Like, are your emotions really in tune with reality or not?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I guess because we could talk about so much and spend an hour and 30 minutes, and I want to talk about more stuff, but we have to bookmark it here, because I think part of if we agree on a lot, it's funny, we would agree on the terms, like emotions are some sort of evaluations about the world. They have to do with values and disvalues and all this stuff. But I just think of, when I use the term value, right, I'm not using the term value in a realist sense. And part of that conversation would be, well, I know you understand what I mean by desire, right? Because you have them yourself. So then I think part of the project is to understand this other sense of value as detached from my stances, my preferences, my desires, my, that kind of, my beliefs, my attitudes. So did you want to say anything to that before we move on?
No, because it's a much longer conversation.
Yeah. Well, look, it's been an hour and 30 minutes. We could do a part 2, or we could try to do a problem of evil, because problem of evil is a big thing. Do you want to try to go for a part 2 in the future?
Yeah, let's do a part 2 in the future, because all I have to say at evil in like 5 minutes would be, what's the problem here? Which is not like a meaningful answer in the slightest. So let's do that for part 2.
All right.
So actually have
Thank you so much for coming on my channel. I had a good discussion with you. I really do appreciate your time. Everyone, thanks for watching. Don't forget to like the video, and if you want to give me money, you should. You can subscribe. My Cash App should be posted. Cash App me, because I get more of your money. But yeah, thanks for everyone's attention, and hopefully you learned something in this exchange. We will be back for part 2. All right. Y'all have a great night.